All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here for our inaugural IRIS co-sponsorship program professional development session. We're going to be discussing volunteer management this evening, so I would like to introduce um, our main speaker, who will be delivering the presentation, Anne Plumley, who is the chair and founder of the Quiet Corner Refugee Resettlement Committee. Did I say that right?
Pretty close.
Okay. Um, and our star intern, Alice McGinnis, is going to be handling the tech side of things. So she'll be monitoring the chat and entrances and exits, etc. And without further ado, I want to let Anne get started.
Well, I will get started.
All
We
right.
have a lovely evening. We hope the Red Sox win, and let's get going on refugee resettlement, volunteer management. My name, as Greg said, is Anne Plumley. With Steve Lane, I co-lead the Quiet Corner Refugee Resettlement Group based out of Mansfield, Willimantic, but we have quite a reach of faith communities and locations where our volunteers come from to support the families we serve. Our mission, just briefly, is Quiet Corner Refugee Resettlement helps immigrants establish new lives and contribute to the communities of the greater Windham, Connecticut area. And with a little more detail, we have a goal statement that I thought you might want to know, and I'll refer to mission statements and goal statements a little later. QCR works with individuals and organizations in a network designed to provide assistance, guidance, support, in navigating American social, legal, financial, employment, and educational systems. QCRR alone and with its partners engages in advocacy and educational efforts to increase understanding, raise funds, and effect meaningful change in national and local immigration policy and practices. Let's hope we hear something about that later this evening from our new president. So next slide, Alice. And then one after that, thanks. Here's the general outline of how I've structured our time together this evening. I think naming some of the conceptions or misconceptions of volunteer management helps ground our conversation. And surely when you think of volunteer management, I bet your gut tells you something, right? Mine sure does. And then I'm going to offer you a couple of conceptual frameworks or approaches or lenses through which you can see volunteer management, frameworks that help place you in context and name where you want to go. There are lots of frameworks and approaches to volunteer management. The ones I'm going to share tonight are just the ones I find myself using the most. And then we switch to this evening's $100,000 questions, right? How to recruit, select, and manage volunteers. This is the heart of our time together. And finally, given that volunteer management is, I hope I'm not going to shock you when I say this, volunteer management is not all unicorns and rainbows. I am going to walk through some ways to work through the messiness of volunteer management. Actually, I want to thank those of you who, when you registered for this session, shared some questions or topics that you wanted to make sure I covered. That really helped me. And you are, as Greg said, most welcome to post questions or comments in the chat session. And we will have lots of time to discuss this at the end. So let's start with some misconceptions of volunteer management. Next slide, Alice. Yeah. So, there's just little truisms, right? The first one, to volunteer for the task is the one you want. And a volunteer who takes initiative, just get out of their way. And volunteers are altruistic people who just love giving selflessly and endlessly, and that motivates enough. And perhaps most perniciously, you can't fire a volunteer. But there are lots of other misconceptions about volunteering, like you can ask a volunteer to do whatever task or role you want, but whatever happens, happens. Or if the client, in this case, the refugee family, likes what they're doing, it's got to be okay. So I hope this presentation helps you structure your group so that these misconceptions about volunteer management and others that we haven't named yet don't become the nitty-gritty reality within your co-sponsorship group, or that when they do happen, you feel you've got some tools to address them. So first, a little bit about the arc or the evolution of co-sponsorship and family roles within the resettlement process. In this graphic, the co-sponsorship organization is in light blue, and the refugee family role is in dark blue. And I think of this as the balance between push and pull. Before the family's arrival at T-1 and counting, the co-sponsorship works with very limited information. They've got some State Department stuff, the IRIS guidance, and maybe most importantly, you have the knowledge of your own context. And using that information, you anticipate what's essential for this family's immediate needs. And you push refugee resettlement decisions like choosing the furnishings of the apartment. And in this process, you also imagine things beyond the family's basic needs and supply some things that you think are likely to delight the family members. And our groups system and volunteers groups, if there are children, every child gets a handmade cuddle blanket. And we have gotten lots of feedback about that. We think it's going to delight the next family, but that's a set of assumptions that we're making. We make lots of judgment calls before the refugee family actually has a voice. Like, for instance, I make a final sweep through the house and I pay attention to lots of details. And if there is any toy weapon or anything, backpack, toy, whatever, with camo print on it, I take it out. And those pre-arrival judgments, again, are 100% pushing our ideas and values and limited knowledge onto the family. So early on, though, in months 1 through 3, family members are dependent on volunteer groups a lot. And yet, those of you who've had this experience know that their idiosyncratic needs and personalities and quirks and values and preferences emerge pretty quickly. And the push-pull is between things that they might not want, but you know they have to do, like get their kids to school on time every day, unless they're really, really sick. And there's a push-pull between the things they do want that cannot be provided as they wish or on their timetable, perhaps even at all. As resettlement continues through months 4 through 6 and 7 through 12, the push-pull balance shifts by intention, by milestones of achievement that we are working through with the family, but also by a whole ton of unanticipated events. And soon your group isn't pushing. The refugee family has to learn to pull, that is, to ask for things. And asking isn't enough. Sometimes the response to an ask is, what have you tried or thought of? What can you do with the help of neighbors and friends you've met? And sometimes the answer is no. So the refugee resettlement group, the co-sponsorship group, certainly has power of decision and allocation of resources to assist this family, and works within the boundaries of the main goals of providing the pathways to independence and making those decisions. And in the sustaining period, the 12 plus months and over, the co-sponsorship involvement is really minimal. The family has taken its rightful place of control and agency in their own lives, and co-sponsorship at this point is really just a few key people who are very solidly in the family's friendship circle, and they're available for true emergencies or deeply important celebrations, and they assist as invited with new situations or opportunities or decision making. So, degree of family contact is another way to frame volunteer structures or roles. And personally, I love the least contact groups. I love finding people who would rather have their fingernails pulled out than take a front and center role. If they're shy, if they're interviewed, whatever, we find people who might love to find a local endodontist to do a root canal at discount, and they could be delighted to get their church group or neighborhood buddies to set up a kitchen. And along the way, they're interested in learning why a Mr. Coffee is not the right answer for a Syrian family, and they might well enjoy an errand to a local Middle Eastern grocery shop for the proper stovetop coffee maker. That's an example of a transient background role. Similarly, co-sponsor groups need volunteers who are in more consistently what I would call back office. That's kind of a corporate-y term, but back office roles. These are essential roles. So here's an example that overlaps with the group organization presentation tomorrow evening. QCRR has a fundraising wizard, somebody who can recruit churches and other groups to raise money in their best ways. QCRR has totally offloaded fundraising. We have never held a fundraiser, and yet we have been never short of money. And I imagine you might want to know how that happens. So here are a couple of examples of dispersed, asynchronous fundraising. One core team member celebrated his 58th birthday on 5/8, May 8th, by inviting, as he always does for every birthday, tons of family and friends and neighbors. This time, he asked them to donate gifts in any combination, monetary gifts, in any combination of 5 and 8, like 58 cents or $850. That one idea, done in his own style and way, raised a couple $1,000s. A 10-year-old decided that his mother garden was producing too many zucchinis and set up a weekly table in fellowship hour. And there is nothing on God's green earth quite like an earnest and winsome kid. He sold a lot of 25-cent squashes that absolutely no one needed and everyone wanted. And one of our network of faith communities is considering splitting proceeds from participation in Church World Services ration challenge. That's a fundraiser where participants eat the same rations as a Syrian refugee for 1 week, and thereby raise money, save lives, while increasing empathy and strengthening community. Some of the money would be local, some of the money would go to Church World Services for their global work, and that's a very appealing approach to fundraising. So the fundraising wizard's job is not to be an event planner, although ours does have a superpower in that way, and that's fine. The role is to share and publicize and celebrate other people's and other groups' creative fundraising ideas that benefit QCRR. And we're especially interested in the ones that don't involve our direct involvement. That's a gift. That is a real gift. We have a lot of back office roles that don't involve, but just by definition, don't involve much family involvement. In the middle of this slide are some things that I think of as connective, or in the good sense of the word, enabling functions. They have some family contact, certainly at first, but as our goal is to encourage independence, and in these areas in particular, friends and neighbors and people they meet on at the school bus stop or at the mosque, people they meet and like and trust, these folks can take on some roles in transportation and translation and community engagement at the family member's invitation, perhaps with your encouragement. And then volunteers with these responsibilities either fade away or transition into another role. But it's really mostly the folks with the direct family contact that need to have carefully coordinated schedules. In the first 30 days, the required documents and meetings and appointments make cuckoo, right? And drive the family's calendar. In the QCRR organization, we have a common calendar. Medical appointments in Iris always takes precedence, and then we use Google Calendar. That's our base, and we insist that everyone with family contact use it. It's loaded on the family's first phone before they arrive, along with photos of core team members and their contact information. And teaching the volunteers and family to use it is the task of our group technology specialists. The tech specialist is mostly a back office role. There's also another role that Iris doesn't list. And we find it essential to coordinate the family-facing activities. Beyond setting up the calendar, training and problem solving it, and setting up phones, our technology specialist researches Wi-Fi and gets the best deal on a used computer when that option comes along at the right time. And then there's another framework that is worth mentioning, and that is timeline. Some people like long-term engagements, others time and energy is best in short bursts. Availability is highly variable among teachers, for instance, and it's best to have the conversation about duration of their volunteer offer before you make an assignment, because things happen in everybody's lives. They happen in volunteers' lives too. Things change. So avoiding a musical chair scramble of volunteers is worth some special attention. I think especially in some sensitive areas like medical care. So at the risk of sounding pedantic, you have to know what you need and want before you have a prayer of finding it. So it works also with recruiting volunteers. A job role or role description is not too much to ask. It can be really quite simple. And for the core leadership group, much of this is in the IRIS manual. For volunteers who contribute to teams, like a math tutor or the coordinator of dental care, the person who helps open a bank account, a very simple job description, changeable over time and changeable to suit the family and the volunteer, is just the foundational tool. We want you to help the primary applicant set up a checking account, learn to write checks, learn to use the debit card and the EBT card, and be able to track funds and expend the family's money in a responsible way. And we'd like you to do that in these certain pieces of that in the next 2 weeks. And then at 6 weeks, the person should be pretty comfortable checking balances online, etc. So know what you want and work that out with the potential volunteer. Where and how are you likely to find these volunteers? So QCRR has had the great blessing from the very, very beginning to have exceptionally strong community partners. And by that, I mean, we started from day one with the support of over 40 faith communities in the Quiet Corner. This is a great blessing, right? But it actually led us to a huge mistake. We issued a "you all come" invitation to volunteers, and we were flat out swamped. We did not know what to do with all of the people and skills we were offered. Some examples we didn't know what to do with: pet therapist, interior decorator, podiatrist. People really, really want to help, even in the smallest ways. And one sad and funny day early on, we issued an all points bulletin saying we needed a colander, and we got 17 that day. We also learned how to credential the people who referred people to us, asking those people things like, given what you know about QCRR, how or where do you think this person you're recommending to us will fit in? What skills and teamwork practices have you personally observed this person using? And what have you heard about how this person worked, or observed how this person works in groups? Your current strong volunteers are very likely to be your best source of new volunteers. There's a dimension of suitability. If you need someone to do after school tutoring, they really have to be available some part of Monday through Friday between 3 and 5 p.m. for 60 to 90 minutes, right? Transportation to a doctor's appointment cannot be on a different day. And if you think back to the push and pull of volunteer involvement, you can be comforted in the knowledge that time critical tasks start to ease up considerably at 30, 60, and 90 points. That's a very welcome relief to volunteer management. And at 60 to 90 days, a wider variety of volunteer activities can be offered to the family. Keyword is offered. By this time, the family has established some relationships, and they often know who they'd prefer to help them with a problem at their apartment or with a question about parent-teacher meetings. They should ask first for help, and soon they should ask the help there directly. You should also be experiencing crisper indications of the adult agency of the family. For instance, we want some family time on Sundays, not ESL appointments. A question asked when someone registered, what about college students? We are in the heart of Yukon land and Eastern Connecticut State University, all right? We've got college students all over the place. And quite frankly, we haven't had mixed to mediocre results with using them. For one thing, the semester constraints limit what we can ask college volunteers to do. There's a transaction time at the start of the semester, developing a learning agreement and getting their professor to sign off on it, and figuring out transportation and schedule flex if the student doesn't have a car, sort of bollockses the works up. And lack of availability in subsequent semesters reduces the possibility that there will be a durable relationship with whichever person they're working directly with. It can take a volunteer manager to manage the student volunteers, and sometimes that's just not practical. Let me give you an example. We had one great, fabulous tutor of a fourth grader. The student assigned to the family's second grader took more of a big sister, fun-focused approach that the parents didn't understand or appreciate. And it took us a long time to figure out the difference between those two tutors, what they were doing, and how the family was interpreting their efforts. Student groups, however, are great fundraisers. Participation in student-led events on campus is a ton of fun. Students can host the family at campus-affiliated groups and programs like the Islamic Center at UConn, the UConn Human Rights Institute, or the Dodd Center program. Students in Eastern Connecticut State University's Peace and Human Rights program can do research, present findings, host a movie discussion, contribute to the broader community's understanding of today's refugee crisis. Then there's a place on that agenda for explaining what QCRR is doing and how people could help. Any number of faculty and administrators have been just invaluable translators and community connectors with us. For instance, a homesick student from the Middle East being invited by a refugee family for dinner. Lovely connections can be made. Just briefly on some of the non-negotiables, if they are a QCR volunteer with family contact, they have been credentialed. And that means a background check, driver's license, insurance, non-discrimination, non-harassment stuff. If they are exploring what it's like to volunteer with QCRR, there is at least one credentialed volunteer present. And we love to invite people who are just checking us out to come spend a couple of hours with one of the ESL teachers or whatever it is they're interested in. We have had folks that volunteer who are undocumented or have other non-typical constraints in their credentialing. And yet they have skills that are very valuable: language, knowledge of how to manage the bus schedules, the ability to stretch SNAP benefits beyond belief, attributes and gifts of great benefit to the family. And our offline practice is to make introductions to the family adults and let the family adults take the lead in defining what this new friend's role is, if any. So next, it's important to orient and set expectations for the volunteer that you've managed to recruit. You know, some people are real big picture people and then work to the details. Others work from the nitty gritty up. Both are essential, and your orientation tasks can be shifted to meet what the new volunteer's learning preferences are. But in general, volunteers need to know how this role fits in with the general context of the co-sponsorship organization, what the family's like, which family members will they be working with, and if it's a child, how do the parents control the activity and access, and what are the particular boundaries this role is likely to bump into. So if you are a male house maintenance volunteer, you are not likely to be allowed into the house when the adult male is not present. Deal with it. And that's a no-go. If you are a tutor for a child, you will need to explain and get concurrence for the games that your own experience tell you are helpful learning tools, but games that might contribute to the parent's fear that you're wasting time and not serious. Singing head, shoulders, knees, and toes is pedagogical on some level and hysterical. This doesn't always, figurative speaking, translate. So a rule of thumb that I use for volunteer assignments is this faux scientifically constructed test, control the variable. If you've had a successful medical coordinator, someone who knows how to speak Husky and Portal fluently, you can put a new volunteer in that role with the next family. And you can do that because you know what that role can and should look like. And there's a coach available. When bumps occur, you can figure out whether it's the role that's not clear or has changed, or the new family has different needs, or the person in the volunteer role needs more support. If it's a new role for your organization, if whenever possible, put a tested and experienced volunteer in that place, because he or she has seen decisions that demonstrate the organizational boundaries and priorities and actions. And you have more confidence that in a situation that requires improv, he or she will get through it adequately and participate in tying up loose ends. Now, believe me, I get it, that sometimes your hair is on fire and you need the person, the volunteer, right in front of your nose at this very moment to do what you say right now, pretty please. But if you have time to breathe, break it down and chunk it out and take your time. Make a gentle introduction to the family. Observe the new child provider handling the toddler headed toward the wallpaper with a crayon in her fist. Watch the volunteer discuss this with the mom. Observe the volunteer getting a view into mom's style of parenting and preferences. And debrief and discuss with the mother. Debrief again and again at regular intervals when the volunteer has family interactions until everybody's comfortable, the mom, the child, the volunteer, and you. But please remember that this observation and debriefing stuff doesn't actually have to be you. In QCRR, other groups are different. We have core team members that are responsible for the final selection of their volunteers, orientation of their volunteers to the specific role, introduction to the family, and all that other kind of stuff. So the core team leaders for education for the children, which would include child care / tutoring and teaching people how to get to the school bus stop, etc. Those volunteers work on a team that is coordinated and supported by a single leader. So next, this blends right into the assignments and coaching and providing organizational clarity. And this again is an overlap with tomorrow's presentation on group organization. So QCRR evolved from having 2 co-leaders directing everyone. Here's a newsflash. That is flat out impossible. Don't try it. We then designated a case manager for each family responsible for coordinating volunteer efforts and family milestones. And that proved overwhelming also. And what's more, the succession planning aspiration that I thought was brilliant just flat out did not work. Candidates for the next case manager looked at the current case manager's frenzy and said, no way. We then tried to have the case manager responsible for family-facing activities and a volunteer manager responsible for recruiting and assigning volunteers. This too failed. But it's not clear to me that the role concept was wrong or the person in the role was unsuited. We ended up with a megalomaniac who usurped the case manager's authority and role and inserted herself into family monitoring at the level of knowing whether the kids had brushed their teeth. Please don't think I'm kidding about this. We settled on an organizational model that I mentioned earlier. Core team leaders responsible for family-facing areas manage a team of volunteers, and they themselves may or may not have a lot of family time. Their role is to select, orient, assign, and coordinate the work of others in that area, using as one key tool that common Google Calendar that I mentioned way up front, because you can't schedule a pediatrician appointment at the same time that that child is supposed to be getting homework tutoring. And calendar conflicts only get sorted out through the common calendar. Now, my thesis about volunteers, assignment, and coaching is that everybody needs a safety net, right? Everybody needs to know their Lifeline's phone number, especially in the beginning. A volunteer needs a buddy to debrief with frequently. And QCR core team members leading the volunteers could be the coach, but others can do it too. And so this is an example of an experienced volunteer now in a new role as a coach rather than as a solo contributor. And the team leader makes sure that the resources are available for whatever it is they need to do. You know, one example I love is inviting some ESOL experts from UConn's School of Education to help our team understand how to teach the parents how to help their children learn English, and, as is often the case, supporting their parents who are in the position of actually learning from their young children. So this is the point where I'm going to take a quick sip of water and then launch into behaviorally anchored feedback. I bet you can't wait. Excuse me, I am going to use this concept of behaviorally anchored feedback in several different ways. It's a miracle management tool. And it is, in a way, a formal or a formula or a structure for a conversation. So it starts with citing an observation about the volunteer. You did this, or you didn't do this other thing. Here's what I heard. Here's what I learned. Here's what you've told me. Here's what I observed in the family, or has been observed by someone else, or reported by the family member. So this is the behavior. And here are the anchor points. The doing or not doing this thing leads to a consequence. So there's an action, reaction, behavior, consequence. The impact or consequence on the family, most especially, but also on the co-sponsorship organization, the goals and mission, the reputation of your organization, the consequence or impact are these other things, adverse impacts, or failure to do good. You missed an opportunity to reinforce something or to expand the family's horizons in where they're comfortable going shopping, whatever. And then there's a problem-solving element. How to correct what went awry, how to make amends, recalibrate, fix it, and a recap that is future-focused, what the person will do next time. So, and a commitment to that. Okay, so when you're in this or a similar situation in the future, here are the menu of options, or the categories of options that would produce a consequence or an impact that is of higher value, if you will, more beneficial, laudatory. And not in a threatening way, but you or whoever's giving this conversation will have check-in points with that volunteer. How is it going doing this the new way? What have you observed about the family's reaction? So it's what economists would call a virtuous circle. You take something and you expand it or turn it from what it is into what it might be or should be. So again, in the next one, motivating and retaining or refreshing volunteers, behaviorally anchored feedback shows up again. It can be very, very motivating. And often the most powerful reward that a volunteer can get is recognition and celebration of something that they have done. So strong volunteer leaders create positive hero stories by expanding on the understanding of the impact of someone's behavior. You take the incident and tie it to your organization's mission, saying, this helps us learn for the next time. This connects us to a community resource we didn't know existed. There's this unexpected outcome of what you did, which is the family found a friendly neighbor and now they've got a new connection to the community. Whatever it is, take what happened and anchor it in something more substantial and important and longer lasting. Make the person the expert of their own experience, lead them into understanding and being proud of the legacy that they are developing. Ask for advice. You don't know the situation or the family like they do. What have they learned that other volunteers can benefit from? What have they learned that your organization can benefit from the next time you think through this type of role? And provide opportunities to do something different. Many folks really like researching and collecting and organizing information or resources that they found, highlighting the hidden treasures of the neighborhood. And these special project efforts can be rewarding in that they do contribute to the knowledge base and the stability and efficacy of your co-sponsorship group and the success of the particular family that you're serving right now. So figure out what this person would consider fun. For some people, it would be organizing participation in the statewide Eid festival, due back the year after COVID. This would be a nightmare for me, but taking the children shopping for school uniforms would just turn some people really on. Taking the family to a specialty food market and buying some of the stuff that they recommend because you want to taste what they think is delicious. Going apple picking, I don't know, just find some ways for some new roles or special projects. I have one warning about hero stories. I love them, but they are not always wonderful. There's an occasional downside to hero stories in that sometimes people can create a breathtaking and challenging route to solving a problem of their own making. So a pattern might emerge. If you find yourself listening to a debrief and getting the sense that this person is bragging, if they need to be needed, if they need to be the center of attention, if this person needs to be the solution to something that in truth didn't need to be urgent, if this person seizes situations that are someone else's responsibility and inserts themselves, if the person thwarts an opportunity for the refugee adult to figure out something on their own, then it's on you. Your leadership tasks are then about boundaries, behaviorally anchored feedback, clearer assignments, defining a goal for this volunteer to let that refugee adult fail, let the situation play out, respect other volunteers' expertise in areas of responsibility, etc. So all of this is in the context of what are your mission and goals and general principles. Now, knowing your mission statement or your goal statements are really a powerful thing. It's a boundary of what's okay or not. I mean, legal and ethical things matter too. At the beginning, when I shared QCR's goal, I said that QCRR does its work with refugee families in the context of in a network. And so that means there are some things that QCRR strategically and intentionally does not do. For instance, we obtain about 90% of our household furnishings from WAIM, W-A-I-M, Wyndham Area Interfaith Ministries. This group has a 5-store building in Willimantic filled with furniture, kitchenware, curtains, bedding, and a whole floor devoted to a clothes closet, all sorted by ages and sizes and casual clothes and sports equipment and job interview suits, all free to folks in need. So when we hear of someone stashing a dresser in their basement or gathering men's winter coats in a variety of sizes, we say, thanks, but no thanks. That's not our or your job. Please donate it to WAIM. Now, when they ask, can we guarantee that their WAIM donation will go to the incoming refugee family? We can't do that, but it will go to a community member in need, and it will give our family members a greater range of choices when they pick out their own clothing the day after arrival. The local faith community groups or other teams that assemble the individual rooms in a family's home before arrival are managed by a coordinating volunteer who selects appropriate furniture and furnishings first at WAIM. And then the team gets all of the fun stuff to do, arranging and adding the grace notes in that room, making it personalized, warm, and welcome. WAIM also acts as our bookkeeper, treasurer, and IRS nonprofit sponsor. So we devote exactly 0 calories to managing those efforts and aspects of our own organizational life. They are truly our back office in very important ways. We partner with another local group when we need to contribute to the intersection of refugee work with asylum seekers or undocumented people, and we take their lead and contribute our own unique superpowers. For instance, we found and furnished an apartment for a UConn adjunct professor entering the US under a program for persecuted artists. We know how to do that. The UConn faculty running this program had no clue. We can do that. So as an organizational network, one of our general principles is to not do what another group or organization can do as well or better than we can. On the slide here are some of my volunteer management general principles. Is what you're doing and the way you're doing it, building on the family's successes and strengths. And if not, stop and change. There are lots of other general principles. You have your own. You might call them something different in your head, but you do have your own. Some of mine are like, if there's no blood on the floor, it can be fixed. If it feels wrong, it probably is. Most of the time, there's time to think. And you're never alone. There's always somebody you can check in with. Volunteer management, the place I struggle with this is when I hear after the fact, almost always, when I hear something that I instantly think is outrageous, just wild. An incident is disclosed, a pattern becomes apparent that had I really been noticing, I would have nipped in the bud. I always hope that one of my tried and true sort of rules of thumb or general principles fits, but if not, new general principles get derived from these wild experiences. But before I personally can get to an evolved and succinct general principle, I need to work my way up a chain of reactions. In my head, I work through what I refer to in my head as shoe bomber rules. And for me, these shoe bomber rules emerge in those hair on fire experiences and occasions where I, who am rarely lost for words, find myself speechless. In my head, I formulate ad hoc general principles. But an occasional ad hoc unique general principle is an oxymoron. General principles should have, if not universal applicability, they should fit in multiple situations and occasions. But in extremis, I formulate what are in effect shoe bomber rules. You might remember this person 2 decades ago who attempted to blow up an international flight by putting explosives in his shoes. And he was thankfully caught, tragedy averted, but ever since then, every flight around the world, people remove their shoes for airport security. It's a rule. The downside of promulgating and talking out of your head and announcing out loud a shoe bomber rule off the cuff and in the moment is that it is unreasonable, abrupt, emotional. The person to whom it is targeted is not likely able to take it in. It's authoritarian and alienating, but the utility of a shoe bomber rule in your head is that upon reflection, it can lead you to clarity in places you didn't know you needed clarity. It helps you identify boundaries you didn't know could be breached. And it can become a teachable moment for you and for your organization, as well as the volunteer who is its object. So here's quickly a couple of examples. Commandeering the document package prepared for the green card interview, and then through unforeseen circumstances, being so late that the family sits in New Haven waiting without the documents, and the appointment with the attorney is forfeited, scheduled, of course, but forfeited. Shoe bomber rule is never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, take possession of the family's ION bag documents. But in the course of volunteer training and discussing infantilization and our propensities to fix and provide and smooth the way, the general principle distilled from this is something like, the more important the stuff, the less your hands belong on it. That fits lots of situations. Another example, showing up at the family home in a custom t-shirt with the volunteer designated grandma and the family's kids named clustered around her. So seeing that, I'm screaming, no, in my head. And I created in my head another shoe bomber rule. You cannot appoint yourself the children's grandma. They and their parents select. If it's not you, it's not you. But the hubris, so the tone deafness and all of that put aside, the general principle is something like, remember, you're not their mom and you never will be. And that's important for all of us to remember. So taking time to reflect. The next slide, thanks, is important. But if you have to act quickly, then there's behaviorally anchored. Alice, are we on the wrong slide? Should be 11.
This is slide number 11. So this was the
Okay.
previous one, and
All right.
this is the next one.
All right. Let's go to 11. So if you have time to reflect and you're attempting to shape a volunteer's behavior after something's gone wrong, the behaviorally anchored feedback in this circumstance is less about discussion. Maybe it's crisper, more directive. If there's something that can be fixed, the person can participate in devising a plan maybe and implementing his or her part of it if that's appropriate. If the person is coachable and demonstrates growth and understanding and is alert to the larger context and consequences, then interventions like reinforced support, team members, etc., can be very affirming and effective. That's supervision and clarification. Or sometimes the person is simply in the wrong role. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. They themselves may have recognized this and may have experienced significant stress. You can help them identify that and name that and take them out of the role where they're not suited. You don't have to immediately put them in another role. You might not have another role, but you can work with that person to identify a gift or skill that's needed elsewhere at some time and make that transition happen. Don't rush it. Just hold their opportunity for re-engagement with your organization in the future roles at an appropriate time. But if you must act quickly, then you really must. Sometimes it only takes a nanosecond to know that you need to jump in. So jump. Focus on the situation and the family member, and don't worry so much about the volunteer in that moment. But as soon as possible in private, discuss very directly the volunteer's issues and what went wrong. Again, using the same, I observed this, here are my next steps, you can help this, here are the consequences for the time being. I or we will figure out how this gets straightened out or made right, handled. I want or I need you to step back now. Your future near-term commitments with the family will be canceled or handled by somebody else. And you'll be in touch to discuss things later. And don't have further contact with the family until we've resolved this thoroughly. But there certainly are circumstances in which what the volunteer did or didn't do is truly horrible, and you need to consider your options with that particular volunteer. Lack of fit with what this organization needs now. So there comes a time in the affairs of all organizations that the reality of incompatible skills, experience, temperament, etc., becomes self-evident, and an amicable separation is necessary. And when that needs to happen, please meet face to face and please have another leader in the conversation. But you can handle it. It's never fun, okay? It's never fun, but it can be graceful and affirming in a different way. Be really grateful. Thank the person for the specific things, some specific things that he or she gave to the organization. Be humble. The organization and you have learned a lot since we started. Times have changed, the family's needs have changed, and we know we need to deploy different volunteers in different ways. Be very clear that the need or the role that this person has been doing is changing, and that person is no longer a good fit for what's needed. You can connect and retain connections. We appreciate your past support, and we can think of ways you can be supportive in the future. And if you can, think ahead and name some. They can give money or raise money. They can distribute flyers to community bulletin boards. And I've never said this out loud to a volunteer, but they could just identify Pig Latin translators. You always need those, right? And be hopeful on behalf of the person. Be grateful for something specific about the person and express your hope that they can find another place to volunteer where their energy and time and skills are a good fit and can be used in different contexts. So messiness happens. Here are some polarities, the milestones sometimes imposed versus the reality of what can happen, rules versus guidelines. There's a lot of improv, no matter how good your plans are. What's the ideal outcome and what's practical, short-term, long-term. And all of this is hard. It is really hard to get volunteer management right in the moment, especially the first time. And you are learning too. The things and people and contexts change constantly. You will always be behind the ball in some aspect of volunteer management. Do not despair, beloveds. Seek help. You do not have to do it all. I've stressed, I hope our community partners, you either have them or might be on the lookout for who your community partners could be. Iris is a partner too. Their website has tons of resources. There are resources on other co-sponsorship websites. Cindy Dunn's group has some videos for volunteer training, for instance. You have lifelines to call. That's Greg and perhaps others at Iris. But set up a buddy system with an adjacent group, get coaching from a local community organization leader that you admire. And since a large number of our volunteers are from faith communities, I've occasionally consulted with their pastor or rabbi, whom I know because not now, but for quite a while, was a local church pastor in that area. So I know these people. These people, these pastors or rabbis, whatever, might have even recommended the volunteer to me. So when I encounter particularly troublesome issues with a volunteer, I might call that pastor and have a conversation about how they've seen this person work and what is the environment that gets them to work more productively or effectively. Now, you might not have those professional relationships with faith communities in your area, but keep the idea in your back pocket. You get the pastor to take that call, and although there might be some confidentiality barriers, I imagine you might get some clues. And finally, this is my one great tool. I did not develop this. This is not my work. I learned about it eons ago. I've long forgotten the attribution for this. If you look it up on the web, lots of people have some version of this copywritten or protected as if they developed it. They didn't. But this simple grid of can do, can't do, will do, won't do has saved me in lots of difficult situations with volunteers and employees. And it is so ingrained in me that I use it almost instinctively. But you can think it through, and it's simple enough. You can think it through when you're in a situation that's confounding. So I always like to start with the most positive position, can do, will do. These are people who are doing what you want them to do and doing it well. And your job there as a leader is to cheer them on, reinforce and recognize, celebrate, expand the scope. But some people don't want to. They're in their groove and they don't want to do anything different. But that's the core, the heart of your volunteer group. If you've got people in the upper right corner, they will do it, but they can't. That's the second easiest sort of a situation to deal with. So if that's your analysis of what's going wrong with this volunteer, then it's providing facts and information and background information, providing resources and guidelines, a coach, a teammate, have them rehearse an interaction and review it after they've had that interaction. This is training. basically. And that's easy enough to do in most circumstances. If you have a situation where you know with some degree of certainty that the person can do what they're being asked to do, but they won't, then it's a little more gnarly. You're going to use the behaviorally anchored feedback and ask them questions like, what's getting in the way? What would need to happen in order to make you more effective in this? What kind of support do you think you need? But there's also often some kind of um, some kind of an impediment. And sometimes it's personal, it's illness or a family issue. Sometimes there's a constraint. Their car isn't reliable and they can't afford to fix it, or they fear public speaking. Sometimes it's interpersonal. They just don't like someone that they're supposed to work with. That dynamic is somehow punishing or embarrassing or threatening. You could learn enough to problem solve solutions for this person. But if you ask the person, they may or may not name what they need for a solution. But with listening and observation, this requires some time and time again trials. Ask what would make this task enjoyable for the person. And say you know what this situation demands of them, and ask what's getting in the way. The lower right, people are sometimes in this quadrant temporarily. There is a serious problem with them, personally or family issues, significant stressors in other areas of their lives. And, a leave of absence is a reasonable thing, or a different role with more flexibility for scheduling. It could be the wrong role, wrong person. And so a recalibration of what the person's skills and interests and availability are, you could probably figure out another place where they can contribute. So you can fix some situations where it's just not a good role fit. But sometimes it's simply not a good fit with your organization. There's been a major boundary violation, for instance. And in that case, simply name it. And don't be afraid. You can name it that you are not a good fit. Your skills, talents, interests, the things you are offering to this organization are not a good fit with our priorities of the moment. And let it go. Let the person go. You can, in fact, fire a volunteer. If it's not a good fit, don't force it. So just in summary, I think refugee resettlement co-sponsorship leadership is sort of like the Peace Corps. It's the hardest job you'll ever love. Managing volunteers does not have to be the shadow side of this lovable and life-saving job that you have. It's a management of volunteers can be a big part of the reward and joy, the community strengthening and the growth that comes from sharing your leadership skills and growing volunteers, taking their skills and perspectives into their next volunteer gig. That's just really enlivening and fun. It's good work. What you are doing or preparing to do is really good work. I mean, not every moment is your best day ever, as they say in Boston, but it is good work, and you can do it, and you can do it well. That's what I believe. So, questions, comments? Stupefied? Time for dinner?
I was wondering about those training videos and how we might be able to access them.
Yeah. Karen just left. It's her group that has them, and I'm sure Greg can put the link to them, make that available to you. She's just a little bit hesitant about it. They're from very early in her group's life. So they're a
Actually,
little
Anne,
rough.
and it's our group that has them.
Oh, it's Karen. It's Karen. I'm sorry.
It's Cindy's group that has them.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to our website, we have a training tab, and the training is, something we did with our first time around. So we had just gone through IRIS training, and we had a huge sort of volunteer gathering, people who are potential volunteers. And so we had a few people speaking. We knew that our family was going to come from Africa. So we had like a professor talking about Africa. And then we had some of our group members talking about the actual resettlement process. And then we had, I forget her name, but she's from the Brookfield group. She talked about resettling, and she actually had experience. So, you definitely can go to the website and take a look at them, but just be warned that, we had not actually settled the family yet when we posted those.
No, but it would be helpful just to kind of take a look at that. What's your website?
It's iprefugee.org.
iprefugee.org. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're
Just always helpful to kind of look at what folks are doing in terms of training.
And Greg, is the IRIS training going to be available as well, the ones you just did?
Yes, they're being edited.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just taking a little longer than expected, but we'll let everybody know when they're available.
Thank you for putting that up there, Alice. Wonderful.
Looks like Mark has a question.
Yes, because we don't know until virtually the last minute which language the family is going to speak. The translators, it's my impression, the translators get brought on board very late. Of course, they're going to be vetted. They're going to have background checks and so forth. But could you talk a little bit about how you integrate the translators into the team? They're critical people, but they don't necessarily have all the roles, and they haven't been around for very long when the family arrives. How does that work?
Yeah, we oh my goodness, the first family we resettled, we just burned up the translator. He was so overwhelmed by the end of that. We've never been able to get him to help us again. Was just awful. So over reliance on a key person is really a bad strategy. We do look for sometimes college students and to do that, and our universities can put us in touch with people with different language skills. We're careful when we're dealing with someone who's perceived as young with respect to what we ask them to translate. There was this wonderful Arabic speaking young woman who was a special ed major at UConn, had younger siblings, and was about the same age as the resettlement family's mom. So that worked well to have her on cultural orientation to school, what's an IEP, those kinds of things. She was well positioned for that. She would have not been well positioned in a discussion with the parents in that family about some employment milestones that were being missed and some family budgeting issues that were recurring. And, you know, she didn't have the gravitas, if you will. So we have looked for older people to do that. We find, you know, it's just sexist as all get out, but a male translator does better in those conversations than a female. We've got some UConn professors and adjuncts and staff that have stepped in to do those roles. We found some medical professionals who, although they are not the caregivers of our family members, they have been able and willing to step out of their practice, even during office hours, to provide a translation that's needed in the middle of an appointment. So we've got a variety of people. The three families that we've resettled have been Syrian. We briefly started to resettle a Ukrainian family. And I just went to one of the local Ukrainian churches on a Sunday morning. I talked with the pastor in advance, and I just, you know, he introduced me at their fellowship time, and I made my pitch. And then I sort of wandered around waiting to be invited to go to sit down at a table and talk it. And we got sufficient translation support for what we needed. As it turned out, that family relocated very quickly, so we had no need of those translators. But that would have been our source for that language group. Along the way, Greg and I learned that someone who speaks Polish is not a good Ukrainian translator, in spite of the fact she thought she was.
I was doing better with my college Russian than she was, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been some ugly times there, but that's how we approach it. We do try to match them up. And once, for instance, someone starts translating for a person or for the children, we try very hard to have that same translator shadow that person through all of their medical or dental appointments. So oftentimes there's one person in the family that you know in advance has some medical issues, and that's where I would try in advance, when you get the State Department little leaflet thumbnail sketch of what they are. If it flags any medical issue, then one priority would be to get a medical someone willing to translate those appointments of the same gender, roughly the same age, and with at least the theoretical commitment to walk that person through.
Just so everybody knows, Alice put the link for Cindy's website in the chat in case you'd like to click on it, then you can bookmark it.
So
Sorry.
surprises, things that you do differently than what I've suggested? What do you wish I had talked about? What's still hanging out there for you?
I could add a comment about translators. You had asked Mark about how you bring them into the teams. The way we do it in IPRR, and this is, I'm sure, somewhat the way Ann's group does it too. Our translator team, which is really just one person who finds the translators, he interviews personally. So he, will make the connection, and he will, well, not during COVID, but before that, he would sit down with the translator, get to know them, try to get an idea of their vocabulary. So for instance, I think it was our family that spoke Kinyarwanda. We had a young girl, really. I mean, she was like maybe 20 or 21, who it was hard to find people who spoke Kinyarwanda. So, our team leader sat down with her and kind of realized that she might not be helpful in some respects because she was so young and had come to the country just a few years before. So maybe not so helpful with, doctor's appointments and things like that, but we did use her for a lot of other things. So our group tries to really get to know them. I know it's a short amount of time, but just to see where they'll fit. And try to use them, where they'd make the most sense. And also with this last family from Sudan, we realized that there was a dialect issue with Arabic. That was our first Arabic speaking family. And, come to find out later that there was a lot they didn't understand from one of the translators. So, that can be an issue as well, and may not come up in an interview.
Well, yeah, thank you, Anne and Cindy. I mean, we have a situation where we have a lot of translators who have come forward, and we have as many translators that have come forward as people in our team. So one of the big tasks is to figure out how to organize the translators and how to utilize them best. On the one hand, I don't want burnout. On the other hand, it can't be so complicated that it takes up all of our time.
Right.
It needs to be a streamlined process.
One of the things, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so that's on my mind.
One of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow night is, the importance of having someone keep, a spreadsheet of your translators, and not just their names and contacts, but when they're available, what holidays they won't be available if they're, a Friday afternoon or a Saturday, possibly what dialect, things like that, so that you won't even reach out to, a certain amount of your translators if you can't use them in the evening or in the daytime or in the morning or on a Sunday. So that could help narrow it down a little bit.
Good.
We've also suffered from families informing us that they found that the translator was not maintaining confidentiality, so that the translator was spreading gossip about them. And we've encountered this several times, I would have to say. I don't know what to do about it. I mean, we don't engage professional translators, but it certainly affects the trust of the families and their willingness to engage with people that we've lined up for them.
There's quite a strenuous set of guidelines and ethics that Iris asked translators to sign at one point. Greg, is that still an active practice?
They do, and actually we're still working on it, but we're actually going to require all Iris interpreters, whether they're in New Haven or working with co-sponsors, to go through Iris interpreter training. Actually, Alice is working on that, if you want to just speak to what that's been like. Because the advantage is that the volunteer coordinator is willing to do interpreter training remotely on Zoom, so that people don't have to come to New Haven for it. And that would complement the confidentiality agreement.
Isn't there an issue? I mean, we've paid our interpreters because I felt they are professionals and they deserve to be paid for their work. So I think there's probably some sensitivity about people who were doing it as volunteers and people who were doing it paid.
Well, in that connection, and again, we're working out the details, but there's actually a program that can be downloaded onto a smartphone called Tarjimly. Tarjim means translation in Arabic. It's something that was developed for refugees and it's free. And our R&P department is piloting it right now. And so what this would mean is the refugees themselves could get a translator anytime they want. So if they need to have a conversation with you and you don't have an interpreter, then they can initiate, the process of getting an interpreter. And similarly, well, as far as IRIS meetings are concerned, we're probably going to reimburse up to $20 per hour for interpreters because we recognize that that has been a big issue for groups. That may only pay part of an hourly rate for some professional interpreters, but we're hoping that the use of this software that the refugees can use when they're not in official meetings with IRIS or other important people, that you won't have to go out of your way to find a translator to have a conversation, in the moment. So yes, so I just wanted to make the point about that, but I didn't mean to cut you off, Alice. If you want to talk a little bit more about the interpreter training.
Yeah, sure. So the interpreter training is for all IRIS interpreters. I've been training people who have been interpreting at IRIS for years and those who just have come on board in the past year. It's really an effort to standardize the program as much as it is to train new interpreters. And it involves a 1-hour Zoom training with the volunteer coordinator that really emphasizes confidentiality, also a background check, and then a Google form with a whole bunch of different permissions, the first of which is confidentiality.
So Alice, I don't know you. Maybe we need an introduction.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can facilitate that. I'm the connector. I just want to point out before we continue, we have a link in the chat for an evaluation of this session. So if you wouldn't mind clicking on that so that you can submit your evaluation, we'd really appreciate that. And as Cindy has alluded to a couple of times, tomorrow evening session will be concentrating on group organization. And both Cindy from Newtown and Karen Foster from Danbury are going to be co-presenting tomorrow evening.
Yay.
Any other questions or comments? It's a lot to take in. I'm going to have your deck converted into PDF so that I can send it to everybody because I can't view key files, but Alice can help me out. So, the presentation is really comprehensive and has a lot of great information. So we want to make sure that we can, let you digest some of that on your own later if you have any questions later on. And did you want me to field questions and send them to you, or did you want to provide your contact info?
Oh, I'll take questions directly if you want. And it's one of the things that I longed for, especially in the early days of having just another co-sponsor leader that I could call. Tell me what's going on here. We only know our own experience, and I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy, especially in this area, to answer questions or give you some ideas or help you script out a conversation that you think is going to be sticky.
I just have to say, Hildy, I love your background, but it looks like you're bobbing up and down out of San Francisco Bay. Just had to point that out.
So who here is, Greg, you said there was somebody here who hasn't resettled a family yet?
That would be Mark.
Mark, oh, okay.
Mhm.
Mark, good luck.
You can do it.
Certainly reach out, I think it's important for us to network. I think somebody asked that in the questions for the sign up. When are we going to be able to formally network with each other?
Yeah, it would be useful. I mean, I'm confident because I know the people, almost all the people in the group very well, and I've known them for a long time, and I know that they are doers.
Oh, that's good.
People who do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And, are very committed, and they're quite varied in terms of their skills. We actually have social workers and physicians and
Oh, that's
so
wonderful.
forth. So I think
That's good.
that's encouraging, but of course, it's new and it's a volunteer activity and a lot of uncertainties. But
Yeah.
thank you for the support.
Yeah.
Are you coming to the training tomorrow night? That would be a good one, I think, for someone who's not resembling family yet.
Yep, tomorrow, definitely.
Okay. See you then.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, we talk about a networking platform all the time, and we're just trying to figure out the best way to do it. Right now, it's just email me. I know, Mark, I gave you contact information for groups in your area. That's generally how it works. But if any of you email and say, I want to get in touch with Cindy, or you can put each other's contact information in the chat before you go if you'd like, or you can email me because I connect everyone to everybody.
Yeah, that would be useful. And of course, I've talked to all the leaders of the groups that have resettled refugees in this area. But some of them are, of course, no longer active. And so it'd be useful to be talking to people who are currently active.
Yeah, there actually aren't that many that are active because most of the families we resettled were in 2016, and some of those groups have not reconstituted themselves. But even if they're not active, they went through it. So definitely pick their brains, like Annie and Killingworth, Jamie and Clinton. Who else is in that? Well, Start Fresh is not that far from you.
Yes, and of course, it would be particularly helpful for some of the people in my group to talk to their counterparts in other group, and this is especially true for the administrator. Fortunately, I've been lucky. I've got a person who really wants to be the administrator and is a capable, experienced administrator. And she's looked at the forms on the website, but it would be useful for her to talk to an administrator in another group.
Those forms.
I know. They're all PDF fillable and downloadable. That's better than the way it was 5 years ago. That's all I can tell you.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
We just call our administrator the paperwork czarina, and I think the title alone just makes her laugh. And we're gonna get her a T-shirt someday. So we just really respect what she does and her tenacity. But it is one of those real back office kind of things that people can do on, they can do it at any hour of the day, basically. And it's for the right person, it's a great way of contributing.
Absolutely. I mean, ever since we introduced that as a role, and it's been successful in every case because it just makes sense. Let one person be the czar or czarina, and that person's sole responsibility is collecting documents.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to.
One of the things we've added this year actually is a communications person. And we've added that because we now use a Gmail email account for all of our many volunteers, some who are active, some who are not. And it's a way for us to continue to connect with volunteers and to give them information and to actually do some fundraising that way. So we actually then update them on what's going on in Start Fresh. The other thing we did with an intern is to create a web page and a Facebook page. Because one of the things we really found, particularly during pandemic, is that keeping our volunteers interested and involved was a challenge, and we tried to address that in those kinds of ways.
Yes, I mean, I'll be asking quite a few questions about communication tomorrow. It seems like the more potential channels of communication, the harder it is to communicate.
Well, that's why we actually created a person who's really good at that. And that person kind of centralizes the communication, not for the specific teams, but really more because we really have tried this past year to reach out to more entities in our community. It's really helped us to have connections with, for instance, folks that are related to churches. So we have actually on our Gmail list, believe it or not, 250 people. They aren't the volunteers who are actually doing the refugee work, but they're people who are interested in our work or have some connection. And they've often been very helpful. For instance, if we need a certain skill that we don't have within our group, we can reach out to folks and say, is anyone out there have such and such? It also helped us with things like furnishing our apartments. We did actually a virtual fundraiser through it, where we just asked for donations, and that was actually very successful. So we're kind of using them. That's a new kind of mechanism for us of, it's not really, I don't think, Greg, it's not really an IRIS position, so to speak, but it's kind of been an add-on for our group.
Yeah, I mean, the groups can set up their website, it doesn't have to be IRIS sanctioned. I mean, as long as, personally identifiable information about the family isn't made public. Yeah.
Well, we don't name our families.
Exactly. I know you don't. So that's, well, we just, we don't have the bandwidth, right? We haven't had the bandwidth to come up with a consistent networking platform. And we certainly don't have the capacity to, review people's, well, we do review people's web pages, but we don't create them or maintain them.
Right. I just was throwing that out because it's been sort of helpful recently
Yeah.
for us, particularly during the pandemic, I think.
Tomorrow, we're going to talk about all of the groups that IRIS doesn't tell you you need, all of the teams that IRIS doesn't tell you about.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear about other groups' additions as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, as we were just talking about this and hearing about the communication newsletter and so on, I mean, there's a whole section of this about running your group that, of course, IRIS has nothing to do with. IRIS is telling us and teaching us how to resettle refugees, but you have to run your group too. You have to get volunteers, you have to manage them, you have to communicate to people. It's a whole lot going on out there. You have to maintain a web page if you decide to do that. So that's a big part of the presentation tomorrow as well.
Nobody has any other questions. Please click on the link for the evaluation. We really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Anne, for your very comprehensive and informative presentation. Thank you, Alice, for monitoring the tech. And thank you all for spending your evening here for our very first professional development session for co-sponsors.